Muted. Folks, if you're just joining us today, welcome to our Sustainable Agricultural Education Association webinar. We're going to wait a few minutes to get started. I was alerted that there are problems with the PDF that has been disseminated through a secondary source, secondary email. So we're going to go ahead and just give folks an extra minute to have time to go to the Sustainable Agricultural Education Association website and link through to the webinar that way if they so choose. So we're going to start in just a minute. So thanks for joining us and hang tight. Hi there, folks. Thanks for joining us and welcome officially to the webinar on Agricultural Apprentices Resources for Best Practices. I think let's just give folks one more minute to connect through. I just got a message that some of our email messages didn't actually carry through the link to the webinar as folks got sent out and secondarily disseminated the email announcement for the webinar. So we're just going to hang tight for one more minute to allow those folks a little extra moment to get into the webinar. So thank you for joining us. We'll start in just a moment here. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started here. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. Welcome to the Sustainable Agricultural Education Association webinar on agricultural apprenticeships, resources for best practices. I am your host, Dr. Lorien Macaulay, Doctor of Agricultural Life Sciences, Community Viability, in the Department of Agricultural Leadership and Community Education here at Virginia Tech, where it is a very snowy second day of classes. So here is wishing that everybody here is having a nice and warm and toasty day, wherever you are, and staying dry. Speaking today is Megan Fehrman, Education Director at Rhodes Farm Corps, in order to introduce the National Agricultural Apprenticeship Learning Network and officially invite you to join if you are not already. And myself, Dr. Lorien Macaulay, on my research into a critical ethnography on-farm apprenticeships, where I worked alongside apprentices in North Carolina and observed some social justice implications thereof. A little bit of housekeeping is that if you all hadn't noticed, I went ahead and put everybody to be muted on entry, so everybody should have been muted as they came into the conference call. We ask that you please stay muted. For full transparency, if, for example, some of the call-in users are not muted, and there's a little bit of background noise, I do have the power within this web system to mute folks, and I will go ahead and do that. I noticed that some people say they cannot hear anything. You should have seen a prompt to call in using your audio from your computer. And I think that's basically, but if you can't hear me, you wouldn't be hearing me say this right now. So I will go ahead and message the person who messaged me about that. So I hope everybody's able to, having no technical difficulties right now, who's on the call and can hear me. So for the first 15 or 20 minutes, Megan Fehrman will be presenting again on the National Agricultural Apprenticeship Learning Network. And then for 15, 20 minutes after that, Lorien Macaulay, will be presenting on my critical ethnography into on-farm apprenticeships. And we ask that you please keep your questions until the end, and I will go ahead and moderate the question and answer session. Please ask your questions by going ahead and using the chat feature on WebEx. And if you don't see the chat feature appear on your screen, it will go ahead and click on the icon in the upper right-hand corner with a little dialog box that says chat, and you can go ahead and chat with members of this webinar and also with us. We ask that if you have a question for the speakers, send it directly to the speaker. So this webinar is sponsored by the Sustainable Agricultural Education Association. This is the second in a series of webinars put forth by the Sustainable Agricultural Education Association. And these webinars serve as a professional development and learning opportunity for sustainable agricultural educators and anyone interested in learning more about sustainable agriculture. But they also serve as a forum or a sounding board for sustainable agricultural educators and members of ours to share their research or work with members of the general public in order to share valuable insights learned with those practicing sustainable agriculture or sustainable agricultural education. So if you'd like to learn more, please visit our website. You can see a link through to that on the welcome screen, or you should be able to on the flyer for the event. The Sustainable Agricultural Education Association champions innovative educational approaches for sustainable agriculture through the development, application, and research of teaching and learning practices. We exist to serve and connect educators, teachers, students, staff, and administrators who focus on the teaching and learning of sustainable agriculture. We host a biannual conference. We collect sustainable agricultural education program listings, including a list of student farms and gardens. We have a library of digital curriculum, and it's I find that to be a very useful depository for course syllabi and other curriculum, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel as you go about your work. So please, if you would like to access any of that information or add to our library, please do visit our website. We're also at SAEA busily planning our next biannual conference, which will be at University of Hawaii, July 27th through 29th. I myself am looking forward to the trip to Hawaii. Please, if you'd like more information, do visit our website. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hear from Megan Fehrman, Education Director at Rhodes Farm Corps, about the National Agricultural Learning Network. let's see, just a moment while I pass the baton to Megan. Okay, Megan.
Okay. Can everybody see the screen? It's hard for me to tell what you're seeing. Is it showing up okay?
Not yet, Megan.
Oh, it's not. Okay. Hold on.
Thank you, everybody. Please bear with us.
Aha. I had to click the button. Okay. Now you should be able, now can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, super. So as Lorien said, I am Megan Fehrman. I'm the Education Program Director for Rogue Farm Corps. We are an educational nonprofit that works in the state of Oregon. Our mission is to train next generation of farmers and ranchers through hands-on educational programs on the preservation of farmland. We also support our local agricultural economies and serve as a model for other communities. Rogue Farm Corps was founded in 2004 by a group of farmers here in the Applegate Valley, where I currently am speaking to you from. And they were all first-generation farmers who had learned from on-farm internships and apprenticeships and really saw the need for this kind of training to continue. Because of our rapidly aging farmer population and their concern about the generational knowledge loss that was coming from farms, not being passed down. Traditionally, farms have been passed down from generation to generation, and we're not seeing that happen so much anymore. And so what they saw was a need to train these first-generation farmers in a way that they had learned to farm. And at the time, in particular, there were limited educational opportunities for young farmers. That's not so true anymore. We've seen a huge number of training programs come online in the last 10 to 15 years, which is exciting. But at the time when Rogue Farm Corps was beginning, that wasn't the case. In the early years, it was just a network of farmers that were trying to join together and have a little bit of joint curriculum and figure out what it was that new farmers needed for a foundation, so they might be able to begin farming on their own. Shortly, after a few years of doing this, it became clear that there actually needed to be some legal structure for these programs. Oregon had a few wage and hour claims against farmers from past interns and apprentices, and it kind of sent a ripple of fear through the farming community. And that was happening not only here, but across the country, and not only in agriculture, but in other industries. And so it became clear that as we were an organization that was tasked with connecting farmers and learners, interns and apprentices, that we actually needed to be doing so in a with a legal framework. And so that's what I'll mostly be talking to you about today as we go. Currently, we are working with more than 20 farm ranches around the state of Oregon in 4 chapter locations. And we have farms that offer opportunities to learn organic vegetable production, herbs, flowers, seed production, animal husbandry, and a variety of marketing and distribution techniques. We do this through an internship program, which is a single season of hands-on training, runs April through October. And then we also have been developing what we're calling a small A apprenticeship program. And this is for folks with some farming experience. We've designed the program to be 2 years and geared towards the development of managerial skills and entrepreneurial development. So I'm going to get into these definitions as we go, but just wanted to give you a little bit of background of where I was coming from. Because of this work, we were invited to participate in the National Agricultural Apprenticeship Learning Network, and we are part of a core team of organizations from around the country, and this project was developed by New Entry Sustainable Farming Project out in New England, and they're heading up the grant. We're all working under a BFRD EET grant that we are in our second year of. So New Entry secured this grant and then invited MOFGA, which is the main Organic Farming and Garden Association, RFC, that's us, the Quivira Coalition that works in the Intermountain West, Southwest of this country, the Dairy Grazing Apprenticeship, which began in Wisconsin but now works in other states around the country, and Villiscus Farms, which is an organic grain farm in Montana. And so the 6 of us, along with our extensive advisory team, have been working for the last year and a half on assessing the resources and researching formal apprenticeship requirements. We are putting together this toolkit that I am going to tell you about today. It's not quite out in the world yet, though it is imminent. We have a survey of farm mentors that is also currently available for folks. So if you are a farmer who is teaching and mentoring people on your farm, we have a survey that we'd love to hear from you from, and we'll have more information about that at the end. But our next step is to take these survey results and figure out how we can better serve farm mentors, what kind of resources and tools they need to become better at what they're doing. And then through this whole thing, obviously we're developing a community of practice and a peer-to-peer dialogue about what's happening across the country and how to support each other. So the big project that we've been focusing on so far through the grant in the last year and a half is the toolkit. This is the cover. So as you can see, it is really close. It's just going into its final editing and formatting. So hopefully it'll be out in the next month here. But this is what we've been working on. So it's extensive. It's going to be an extensive resource. We have a chapter on options for structuring farm labor and learning, how to build your apprenticeship program, how to develop your curriculum, things you want to consider around hosting and employment, career services and ongoing support for after people leave your apprenticeship program, how to evaluate your apprenticeship program and track graduates. There will be additional resources and references and case studies. So again, a pretty extensive document. I think last I checked it was somewhere in the 75-page range. So we've really been collecting the best resources from the core programs and our advisors and other things out in the world to put them in one location for everybody. As you can see from all of that, creating an apprenticeship or internship or on-farm learning experience of some kind really does require a lot of careful planning and an understanding and hopefully an adherence to the law. We know that there's a lot of farms out there that are hosting informal learners and laborers, and they're outside of a legal structure. And our hope with this toolkit is that people may choose to bring their programs into compliance so that they can better manage their risk. But this is a complex area of law, and it varies from state to state, and then there's also federal labor law to consider. So, you know, what we're putting forward is not legal advice, and it does not pertain, mostly it does not pertain to every specific situation. You really have to double check with your state labor laws. And it may be wise to consider consulting an attorney. As I said, none of what I'm about to say is considered legal advice, although we have had great help from agricultural lawyers around the country while we've been doing this, putting this toolkit together, and Rogue Farm Corps specifically has consulted with a number of attorneys through our process in developing our program, just to make sure that, you know, what we're doing and how we're helping farmers manage risk is is at least a legally defensible structure. And if you want to know more about some of that stuff, Farm Commons is an excellent resource, farmcommons.org, and they've got a ton of resources on agricultural law and some of these frameworks that we're about to talk about. So I'm going to spend the rest of the time mostly talking about Section 2 of the toolkit, which are the categories for on-farm labor and learning. And there's really only 3 of them that are considered legal options. And so I think this is a place to start so that we all have definitions in mind and a framework for when we're talking about this and creating these programs, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding out there. So also, you know, this was a really hard process as the core team went through for the past year and a half because there's only a few actual legal options and because there's a lot of people operating outside of that. And so we really had to decide how we wanted to define these terms and how we wanted to approach this. The first is a formal structure for internship, and these are the 6 criteria established by the U.S. Department of Labor for unpaid internships, and at least in the state of Oregon, this framework applies for what we do here at Rogue Farm Corps. So you can see, I'm not going to go over these point by point or totally in depth, but basically, you know, some important things to understand is that, you know, the intern is not necessarily entitled to a job at the conclusion of the training. They're not entitled to wages and that during the training, and that is something that all parties should understand. But because of those things, the intern should not displace regular employees. They need to be supervised and actually in an environment that kind of mimics a vocational school. It doesn't have to be a program that is actually certified by the Department of Education, but it should look like a vocational school, and that's kind of what we've been trying to develop at Rogue Farm Corps. Number 4 is a little bit tricky, and people get hung up on this a little bit, but the employer should not derive any immediate advantages from the activities of the intern, and on occasion its operations may actually be impeded. And I think most farmers who work with interns could definitely say that second half happens quite frequently. And, you know, I think that the first half with the advantages that might be derived from their activity is just a little bit of a balance. And I'll tell you about how we show that training over time, what we've developed at Rogue Farm Corps to do that. So yeah, the only other piece of this is that the experience is mostly for the benefit of the intern. The other framework that folks are using in these programs is what we're calling capital A apprenticeship or a registered apprenticeship. This is a formal apprenticeship program that actually has standards from the federal and state Department of Labor. And it ensures quality instruction, so it's classroom instruction and paid on-the-job training, so that is a major difference. Registered apprentices or people working under a registered apprenticeship program actually are usually paid at least minimum wage, if not higher. And the apprenticeship curriculum has been determined through a process called a DACM, which is developing a curriculum protocol. And this is an extensive process that really sets a curriculum for a specific piece of the agricultural industry. So whether it's a CSA veggie farmer or in the case of the dairy grazing apprenticeship, obviously specific to dairy farming, grass-based dairy farming. And they were the first registered apprenticeship, agricultural apprenticeship in the country. As I said, they began in Wisconsin and now they work in other states. And we are now seeing a few other programs go this route. But because of the extensive process and the interaction with both federal and state officials on how to do this in your state, it is quite a challenging and lengthy process. And there's reasons people do it and there's reasons people don't do it. We have not chosen this route at Rogue Farm Corps, partially because we don't even have an agricultural apprenticeship board in the state of Oregon, and so we would have to start way back at square one to get that going and then go through the DACM process and figure that out. And it may be something we eventually move towards, but we've decided to structure our programs differently for the time being. So the third final category of legal framework is an employee. These are people who suffer or permit to work. They are to be provided compensation for their services, and they are entitled to the protections of the Fair Labor and Standards Act, which, you know, is all employment law. So minimum wage, workers' comp, tax benefits, those sorts of things. Sometimes people try to get away with calling interns or apprentices volunteers, and just want to make it clear that for-profit farm businesses cannot legally engage with volunteers in their operations, and anybody who is quote-unquote volunteering on a for-profit farm should actually be paid and considered an employee. And again, that would mean all applicable federal and state employment laws apply, including minimum wage, workers' comp, and payroll tax requirements. So volunteering on a for-profit business really isn't an option. Again, we know that it exists, and people are doing it. It just is a little bit of a risky management decision. So that brings us to the small A apprentice. As I said, we're aware that a number of these programs and farms are offering what they're calling apprenticeships that are not registered with the Department of Labor, and that this term has existed for a lot longer than the rules around registered apprenticeship and internship and all of these other things at the state and federal level. And it's a colloquial term, and it has referred for a long time to hands-on training alongside a mentor who is experienced in their trade and their art. And we don't want to lose that. I mean, this is key to generational knowledge transfer. It's key to learning and especially learning the art and mastery of farming. And we do understand that often these informal and non-registered apprenticeships do provide more advanced or comprehensive training than is provided through an internship, and so we're trying to make that distinction between those two terms as well. But we would just encourage people, if they are running an apprenticeship program on their farm or through an organization, that they consider how to legally classify those, either through meeting the 6 criteria of an unpaid internship, registering the apprenticeship, or by treating them as employees and calling them whatever you want. So as I said, through our program, we are operating under the 6 criteria for unpaid internship for both our internship program and our apprenticeship program. We're just using the 2 terms to distinguish a more entry-level program and then an advanced training program. So our internship, as I said, 1 season, they get 15 to 20 classes and farm tours. We host discussion groups. They're journaling about their experience. They have an independent study project on their farms. They're getting 1,200 to 1,500 hours in the field with a mentor. And then we do skill evaluation and assessment 3 times throughout the season. They get access to a social network and a cohort with other interns on farm in their chapter. And it's a great full immersion into agricultural community and life. Our apprenticeship, in contrast, is 2 seasons long. We're doing about 6 classes and 3 or 4 weekend intensives per season with the entire cohort. So a lot less classes, but they're more in depth, advanced agricultural skills. And then we have a business planning curriculum as well that we alternate those between the 2 years. They end up they're on farm for longer, so more like February through November, so they're getting more of the whole farm experience and more hours in the field with a mentor. They also get skill evaluation and assessment. We're trying to move them through into more of a managerial experience, and then also provide access to next step resources and assistance as they become farmers. This is just a quick look at a snapshot of our on-farm curriculum and evaluation, just to show how the scale at the top is to show how people move through these agricultural skills. And so to demonstrate that, yeah, you may be able to demonstrate competency with a task such as direct seeding fairly early on in your experience, but that's just one piece, and that's nowhere near all that you need to become a farmer. And so showing that over the course of a season or 2 seasons or even 3, that you are moving through these skills and they actually are continuing to develop, and you're moving along that continuum to be able to move towards independence and then actually managing others to complete the task as you would need to do if you were running or managing a farm. And then just quick, what our organization provides for our farmers. We assist with the recruitment and placement of these folks on the farm, although we don't actually, the farmers themselves actually choose who they'd like to offer their intern and apprenticeship positions to. We just assist with that process. We have created standards and guidelines for the farms that we are working with. We've done a ton of work on interpreting and understanding the legal risks and concerns and risk management. Obviously, we're sharing the responsibility for mentoring, mediating, and guiding these folks on their journey to become farmers. And this is all providing a structured framework for education and training. We also are working with our mentors on assessing themselves through their mentoring process and offering them trainings and a peer mentor network. So that's kind of how we are involved in our farm community. And this is all because we want to see people succeed. This is an old graphic and needs some work, but it gets the point across that we're really trying to get these folks through a continuum. You know, if you take a first-generation farmer who has to learn how to farm, plus all the other things to become a mature farm business, we're talking about at least 10 to 15 years of support services to usher them through that pathway. And we want to see farming actually be a viable career, and that there is a career pathway that they can get on. And so we're trying to map that out. And our internship program is the first level there, and then our apprenticeship is trying to get them through skill development into farm business launching. And eventually, with the help of other agricultural service providers and people working on these issues, hopefully they will make it into the successful launch of their own business or successful managerial, be on a managerial team of another farm and work towards maturity. So that's what I have got for you today. I'm going to turn it over to Lorien now and hear from her.
All right. Thank you very much, Megan. That was really informative. Actually, I am not a part of the National Agricultural Apprenticeship Network yet, but I look forward to signing up. And thanks for telling us all about it. I know compliance is on the mind of a lot of farmers, and it is one of those things that the law is the law, but the law can be changed. The law is only a reflection of our values. So it's something that I personally think, based on some of my reading, that also it's an area of exciting new work in law. So just to introduce myself again, I am Dr. Lorien Macaulay of Agricultural Life Sciences and Community Viability in Agricultural Leadership and Community Education at Virginia Tech. And I will be talking about my critical ethnographic case study of on-farm apprenticeships, a few social justice considerations, I wanted to say, before I returned back to grad school, I had worked on 2 farms, and one of those farms actually hosted an on-farm apprentice. So I never did do an apprenticeship before coming back to school, but I worked for 9 years in various outdoor education settings. Did do an apprenticeship, but it was in something a little bit related, wilderness survival skills, but not an actual on-farm apprenticeship. You could argue that's actually really related. I was also a market gardener for a nonprofit, managed a nonprofit market garden for 2 seasons. So therein lies my interest in on-farm apprenticeships, and I'm continuing my research in on-farm apprenticeship. So I'd like to preface any conversation of on-farm apprenticeship by saying farm labor of any kind is hard to find. On-farm apprenticeships are often viewed out there in the world as both, on-farm apprentices are farmers in training, but also apprenticeships themselves are an inexpensive labor source for small sustainable farms. And it's growing in importance as an inexpensive labor source for small sustainable farms. So what I view it as is that farmers who host apprenticeships, oftentimes, of the ones I've talked to, they really don't necessarily have a very good alternative for their labor source. It's not like we have a very in-place system for farm labor that is, you know, people are able to really, like, no problem pay their farm labor well, and that there's that, you know, in essence, that there are willing and ready people to work on farms. So, in my opinion, oftentimes farmers who host apprentices are just making the most of a bad situation, in my opinion. So, bad situation being the problematic nature of farm labor in the United States today. I'd like to also say that one of the reasons I wanted to research on-farm apprenticeship is because apprentices really, you know, actually often don't go on to continue as farmers or as primary operators in any case. Many of them do continue on as food system advocates, nonprofit professionals, et cetera. But as many of us on this call know, we have an aging farmer population, and as Megan was saying, we really need to address the shortage of people beginning farming today. So in one of my surveys of Virginia farmers who host apprentices, we estimated that based on that survey, 1 in 20 apprentices were going on to be primary operators. So again, this is something that we sort of started to wonder, well, what's going on with apprentices? Why is that number so low? Also looking at how some of the studies, including our own survey of Virginia farmers, suggested that many are not from a farming background, and many are if there was any interaction there between how farmers, basically, you know, farmers being from a certain demographic in the United States overall, if you look at statistical averages, and then if you compare that with the actual statistical averages of who actually is undertaking an apprenticeship, you see that there's a difference. And what's the interaction there, and does that relate? So to sort of address some of these questions, I undertook a critical ethnographic case study. So this was me going into the field, sort of as more like an anthropologist might, but asking some tough questions. And I worked within a network of connected actors centered around a nonprofit organization in Asheville, North Carolina that must remain anonymous. I did participant observation, which means I worked alongside 19 apprentices on 6 farms, met many more through the all of the many activities that I also attended throughout my season as an apprentice, going to all the workshops and all the educational offerings that the apprentices were going to, and also social events for the apprentices. Interviewed 25 farmers and apprentices, and analyzed scores and scores of documents. And basically this was all the sort of official information being traded and talked about on these farms. And through the nonprofit organization as apprenticeship learning. So, and this was, again, to get to the bottom of sort of what's the interaction here between demographics, social justice, and what's going on with these on-farm apprenticeships. So one thing I definitely noticed is that I had said at the beginning of this presentation that there are two reasons for an apprentice undertaking the apprenticeship, or I mean, even a farmer too. Farmers oftentimes are seeking inexpensive labor, even though, of course, we know there are many other reasons. Many farmers definitely have an educational imperative, but they also benefit from the inexpensive labor. Beginning farmer training is obviously the most ostensible reason for undertaking an apprenticeship, but really one thing that came up over and over again was sort of a lack of commitment that many apprentices actually do not have a sort of commitment to continuing farming after the apprenticeship concludes, and they really want an authentic lifestyle experience. They want to have a meaningful experience. They feel that, as Ross, the farmer, says, they feel that something is lacking in their lives and they're seeking something real. So in our moving forward with professionalizing our agricultural apprenticeship experiences, this is something that I feel has to kind of be talked about, because it is, it's like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Many apprentices really are seeking this meaningful experience, and in the professionalization, perhaps doing it in an artful way to retain this meaningful experience. Also, one thing I noticed through my summer is something that I think most people already sort of know, is that there's a definite relationship between apprenticeships and the alternative agri-food movement, or local food movement, good food movement, whatever you might call it. And that's that they're coming to the farm because of values. And I feel that farmers and whatever program initiatives are dealing with apprentices need to make sure that these values are retained. The values of the local food movement, I like how, we all kind of know this, but I like how it's summed up by Constance et al. Here on the left-hand of the screen. Values of ecological sustainability, rural community development, and agrarianism. An emphasis on food quality, that the food is healthy, that it's tasty, that it's fresh. And of course, an emphasis on social justice, equity, and communitarian values. And of course, here on the right side are some of the things I noticed on the farms, which is talking about their values of voluntary simplicity, valuing an authentic farm lifestyle, almost to the point of being a little bit nostalgic about farming. They're aligning with the clean parts of the job. In other words, clean, beautiful plants, clean fresh air and country living, or embracing the dirty parts of the job, like talking about getting your hands dirty and the value of getting your hands dirty, and really the idea of it's only dirt and dirt don't hurt, so that kind of thing, and aligning with that, which of course aligns with the alternative agri-food movement values. Also, that movement membership is really important, that apprentices are not necessarily just coming to the farm as oriented towards professional development and training for a career path. They're also oriented towards being a part of a movement, being a part of something bigger than themselves. It's not just for themselves, it's because they're part of this the changing of the food system, this critical engagement with the food system. And also, in and among that, communitarian values. So the value on being a good member of society, the value of community. So again, these are values to really understand going forward with whatever on-farm apprenticeship programming might be put together. Also, this is interesting that there's this overlap between alternative agri-food movements and on-farm apprenticeships, because there are also some cultural aspects of all the alternative agri-food movement that sort of diffuse into apprenticeship, in my opinion. There is, as many authors have written, a selection of which you can see on the lower left of the screen, the alternative agri-food movement has been critiqued for whiteness, in other words, having practice and sets of knowledge, skills, and activities that are very culturally appropriate for white middle to upper class individuals. It's also been critiqued for what some have called anachronistic nostalgia. So looking back in time and realizing that back in time isn't all good. There's, of course, there's great things. You know, for example, the environment wasn't as messed up in the past, but that the really like critiquing, looking back in the past also looks towards power, privilege, and property considerations, which of course is not as culturally appropriate to really celebrate for many groups. And of course, something I'm sure many are aware is the idea of a white male farmer identity. And I just wanted to point out, you know, just as a very quick example, Wendell Berry, one of my favorite authors, and the reason many people have sort of joined the food movement. But here is his 2010 book, and just wanted to bring a little bit of attention to the cover, 1934 classic Americana painting, Dinner for Threshers, where clearly this aesthetic is something that is in the minds, in the hearts of many alternative agri-food movement practitioners, including on-farm apprentices. So something that really needs to be thought about is, in our apprenticeship activity, how are we continuing sort of the parts of the past that are rather best left in the past, and how are we continuing the parts that are good? Here, you know, the cover of this 2010 very popular book in the alternative agri-food movement here shows a clear separation of women and men, all white. So just something to sort of think about. How you see this playing out, or how I saw this playing out during my summer of spending time with on-farm apprenticeships and apprentices and dealing with the local food movement. This idea of, are you tough enough to be a farmer? Now, if we harken back to the past, we're looking at a particular image of a farmer. And unfortunately, this focus on toughness means that if we're oriented towards we have to prove how tough we are as an on-farm apprentice on a farm, or even as a farmer, as a lot of these small and beginning farmers who host apprentices are, and they are still learning sort of their own identity and how to farm and putting their farm system together, they may forget to plan to make farm work as easy and efficient as possible. And just as an example, on one of the farms I worked on, we see this very familiar blue tub that you'd see at a party, maybe filled with ice and beer. But this very familiar object being used to fill with clumps of dirt and weeds and carried all the way across the farm, and you know, one by one by an individual, dumped. And you know, it's fine. Of course, you can do that. And on another farm, using this exact very similar situation with this other familiar object, this Rubbermaid container on the bottom right of your screen. And it's just that the problem with this is that if you're oriented towards proving your toughness, you're going to just not see a problem with doing these kinds of things. Instead, and I noticed on both of these farms, wheelbarrows and wagons. So it was a little bit, just sort of raised a little bit of an issue for me, wondering, well, why aren't we using the wheelbarrows and wagons? Or the trucks that were present on the farm to move all these very heavy objects. So the problem is, at the end of the day, if your back is sore and you have spent a long time in a very inefficient task and not done that very much, many apprentices might conclude that indeed they are not tough enough for farming. So labor planning was one of those things that I noticed on the farms that were just kind of not happening like you'd think they would. As Jack, the farmer, said, he had a suck-it-up mentality. I don't think it really needs to be like that, you know? I refuse to believe, you know? It's obviously hard work, but it doesn't have to be crummy, horrible work. Bending over and, you know, having an arch back for however many hours you're working, that's not a way to ever work or live. And June, the farmer, says that's just bad planning. So it's something to be aware of going forward. Also, that most of the apprentices were practicing a lifestyle on the farms that I would call voluntary simplicity, or even venturing into asceticism. Asceticism being, of course, the denial of comforts and luxuries and towards a spiritual bent. And for example, living in, trailers such as this on the right-hand screen, their bathroom facilities were very poor. I mean, when I say poor, I wanted to tell you all that I spent time teaching wilderness survival skills, because I spent the better part of 3 years living in a tent, and even I was appalled at some of these bathroom facilities, and there was little outward complaint, because it was sort of just expected that you would be embracing these values of voluntary simplicity. There were a lot of bare hands and bare feet, which, in a way is a very beautiful thing. I love the idea of, barefoot farmer, but it's, when you think about it, at the end of the day, it's pretty tough to actually, have sore hands and sore feet. And again, sort of disillusioning to many of the apprentices who sort of can't really see themselves doing this very long. Also, bare cupboards. For example, eating dry beans and kale when nothing else was in season. The picture on the bottom right is a picture of sort of what on 2 farms we were up against. Spiny pigweed, a horrible, horrible pernicious weed on many old tobacco farms in the United States Southeast, has a spine that will pierce a leather glove, and you have people singing the praises of picking it with their bare hands, and that farmers should be able to pick it with their bare hands. And so these are just kind of examples, on these farms. I mean, I saw stirrup hoes, I saw, single-time cultivator, hand cultivators. There was no explicit reason why I thought we should be using our bare hands. But again, it's that there are these values that are guiding these actions, and which, gets you through a day, but at the end of the season has apprentices potentially being somewhat disillusioned. So what I did notice is that there's a social stigma on manual labor especially with most apprentices being white, middle to upper class individuals and coming from places of privilege. So with the whole work expectations, the social stigma of manual labor was being negotiated through the values of the alternative agriculture movement. In other words, the idea of, we're going to get dirty, getting your hands dirty, and then the idea of clean parts of the job, good food, healthy landscapes, country living, health, and that one thing I wanted to point out is that, of course, many of us know that farming is often talked about as a lifestyle or a passion. But in my opinion, perhaps, and I know the National Agricultural Learning Network is seeking to do this, to professionalize the field, it needs to be talked about as more of a profession. In other words, so that it's not engaging this love what you do rhetoric, because what it is it's extracting a lot of very hard surplus labor out of people, and not paying them sufficiently to do so, which again, you can only keep up for so long. Even the farmers in my study, and I'm sure many of us have talked to many other farmers like this, even the farmers in my study were saying they're almost burnt out. They're not going to be able to be doing this much longer maybe. So it's just something that we need to really consider the value on voluntary simplicity, because it's leading to asceticism, which is actually having these real impacts on the ground. So I also noticed that there was privilege being used to produce and maintain white racialized faces. This is really hard to record. Obviously, people didn't talk about it. People were certainly not overtly racist. There was definitely a value on equity and communitarian values, but when you have a culture that is appropriate towards white middle to upper class individuals, it's very difficult to be inclusive for all. So I wanted to just posit a few ideas of how we are excluding groups. you know, and I know much has been said about the structural barriers. For example, only middle to upper class individuals are able to afford a low to no pay per season. And I don't want to say only. Obviously, there are a lot of exceptions to this, but on average, who's able to afford that? Middle to upper class folks. And the rural spaces are also not as inviting to racial minority groups often. Also, the food itself, which we know that the food is, there's a really gosh darn good reason why when you go to a local food potluck, it looks a lot like this first circle up here on the right-hand side of the screen. We're using farm products. That shouldn't change. But I did notice, just to really quickly mention, you see, for example, that the food on the Hormel party tray that I put a picture of here on the screen is definitely out of place in a local food potluck. And if we're going to go ahead and have workshops and have meetings and serve food, and not only that, but just talk about food and celebrate certain kinds of food, we just have to think through what kind of messages we're sending. I know a lot of the food I've seen at during this study and at other workshops was very, had social status markers that made it only appropriate for white middle to upper class individuals. And just to think that through when we're putting on events for apprentices. I saw a person, a single mom who's grown up on a farm, show up at one of these potlucks that were, it was a potluck apprenticeship workshop with this Hormel party tray, and she felt so out of place she didn't even put it on the table with the rest of the food, and felt very, just did not feel that she fit in. She was obviously sticking to the margins, even though she was very interested in learning more. So just really think that one through. Also, the one thing I didn't realize, and I should have, is that yoga seems to overlap a lot with sustainable agriculture, and not just yoga, but I'm pulling out yoga as an example, but other spiritual ways of regarding health, which we just have to think of in the United States, in our current day, modern context. We do have to think through, I think, how inviting that is to all groups. So you had really people who were viewing their farm work as yoga, and farmers who were telling their apprentices that they should really be looking at their each motion that they take in the field as, you know, this yoga practice and moving their body in that kind of way. So I think that that's sort of one of those things to just sort of be aware of. So for going forward, I would like to think that we could be, you know, the National Agricultural Learning Network, et cetera, are movement intellectuals who are helping to drive us forward and help us make our social change as great as possible. So I kind of would have a few recommendations for practice, that we should downplay some of the more aesthetic and sort of the toughness factor of what is often called a romanticized nostalgic version of agrarianism, and kind of be a little more realistic and professional. Just be reflective about what we're doing that could be culturally exclusive and exclusive to white middle to upper class groups, and that we need to really not throw the baby out with the bathwater and really put our values first, and understand that that's why a lot of our apprentices are coming to the apprenticeship. So Megan went ahead and provided these ways to connect with the network. Please go ahead and add yourself to the Agricultural Apprenticeship Program map if you're not already on it. And of course, the toolkit will be coming soon. And I wanted to go ahead and provide our contact information. And you know, please get in touch if you have any questions or would like further information. And I think we have a little time for questions. So let's see.
Yeah, I got one on where the toolkit will be available, and it will be available on the National Agricultural Apprenticeship Learning Network's website. and I believe it's for free. It'll be an open source resource, I think. Brianna Bauman's on the call. If that is not true, maybe she could chime in and let us know if there actually will be a cost associated with it. But it should be coming out soon. If you sign up for the listserv or you visit the website, definitely the announcements will be there and it should be available.
Right. Great. And, you know, this is a very interesting comment from Ben Ketzler. I really appreciate his comment. He says that he's a beginning farmer and what he's seeing in terms of labor is pretty bleak, and that he's concerned that the current system is highly unsustainable, and we need to think about what constitutes labor and also about the current economic system's ability to sustain a for-profit farming model. And yeah, I actually kind of, I see that as a really good comment. I think it's something that, again, like as I was trying to lead with, you know, we can only deal with the political and legal frameworks and contexts in which we are right now. But I do think that those can be, if we have a collective dialogue, those can be shifted. You know, and again, I think, like, you know, most people who work on farm labor issues will especially tell you that, and beginning farmers know that it's really, there's no very solid and concrete farm labor model in the United States. So we don't have, it's really problematic, and it's something that even, especially with the immigration debate looming, we need to really talk about as a nation. Okay, so Ben asks, if you make a nonprofit or your farm, if you make your farm a nonprofit, do the losses pass through to your 1040 as they do with the Section F? Do you understand what that means, Megan?
A little bit. You're asking Ben about? I can't see the comment, so.
Okay. Well, I mean, I can also address it. I know that basically does the structure of labor change if your farm is a nonprofit? I have actually looked into that, and I do think that it does. Nonprofits are able to have volunteers in a way that a for-profit business is not. It does change almost everything with the legal structures.
And that is true. We have some nonprofit farms that don't utilize Rogue Farm Corps structure fully because they are a nonprofit. I would just, I'm going to channel Rachel Armstrong here, who's the director of Farm Commons, and she has what she calls a duck test, and she uses it for employees, but basically she says if it looks like a duck and sounds like a duck, then it's probably a duck, and she uses that for employees too. So even on nonprofits, if it looks like an employee and it's doing the work of an employee, you still have to be careful, even though they're allowed to have volunteers in a way that for-profit businesses aren't. You still want to make sure that you can justify the learning environment and that the expectations of the volunteer aren't the same as the expectations that you would have of an employee, and their work isn't necessarily the same, so that you can, again, keep yourself protected.
Right. And let's see, and this is one thing, Megan, maybe you'd like to comment on. Michelle Miller asks that if a farmer is working too many hours, workers may be expected to do the same, and that's one of the reasons why farmers may not understand how many hours and how much to pay. It's because farmers don't pay themselves.
Yeah, I think that's I think it's a big concern, and it's a great observation. Farmers obviously are some of the hardest working and longest working people that I know. With our program, that's something that we're monitoring, again, because the expectation is not that they are the farmer or an employee and that they're, not provided the same kind of compensation. And so we actually have hour limits that our interns and apprentices are are held in with the structure of our program, and that's something that we check up on. And I think it's huge, not only that farmers make a living wage for themselves, but also for the people on the farm that are either learning or working, what the expectation is there. Obviously, with an employee, they're going to get paid for those hours, or I mean, ideally they would be paid for those hours. So I just suggest to farmers that you're not reliant on intern or apprenticeship labor, because that's not the idea behind the program. It really is supposed to be a learning environment, and as I said earlier, you probably will derive some benefit from that at some point, but that can't be the expectation. And over the years with the farms that we've worked with, we've found that the ones that started with us and didn't have the kind of paid employees that they needed to actually support their whole crew and the farm throughout the season figure it out fast, because they understand once we get into it that they can't just rely on intern or apprentice labor, or they have them leave in June, which happens quite a bit, and then they don't have anybody else to fall back on, and their whole season is really, really hard. So again, making sure that you have the kind of paid help that you actually need to run the farm, and then having interns or apprentices on your farm in a learning environment and as a part of a more diverse community is really what we recommend. And I mean, to the extent that we're able as a farming and agricultural community and support community to try to figure out how to pay farmers living wages in and of themselves, I think that's a huge task and something that we need to get better at and figure out how to do that within our food system.
Right, I completely agree. And there's also, as the last question, I know we're pretty much out of time here, so last question, Tim Wilson asks if there are examples of resources to professionalize the farm apprenticeship other than the DACM, maybe for another industry. I honestly, and Megan mentioned farm commons, and I'm gonna also say that I would really recommend that you check out farm commons and their discussion of sort of ways that farmers might legally deal with their these apprenticeship issues. Megan, do you have anything to add to that, or?
Well, that's kind of, we're trying to do so with our program in a non-registered way. So yeah, it's coming up with a curriculum for your farm and what you're going to be teaching, what they're going to be learning, and kind of spelling that out with monthly learning targets. Those sorts of things are all ways that we're seeing farmers do this without going through the DACM. That's kind of the reason, one of the reasons we've chosen not to pursue that so far, is just that we have a wide variety and diversity of farms that we work with, and so we're working with them individually to come up with their on-farm curriculums instead of going through the formalized process for one specific piece of agriculture, i.e. vegetable farming or just dairy. Obviously those exist now. They're in our open, other programs have pursued those, so we're seeing more and more resources available for farms and programs that want to start working on their curriculum. But I really think that if you are doing this, that you need to have evidence of this being an education and training opportunity for people. And so even if it's not a formalized DACM process, that you need to work out a curriculum for your farm. And the toolkit will definitely provide some resources to help you do that when it comes out as well. And then finally, we just wanted to let you know that we have recorded this webinar. It will be up on the SAEA website, and also there should be a link on the network's website shortly. So if you want a copy of the slides or see what we talked about, it will be available there. If there's anything else you want from me or Lorien specifically, please feel free to shoot us an email. I'll just speak for you on that one, Lorien, sorry. But yeah, we're available if anybody has any more specific questions or resources they want to be connected with.
Absolutely. We will certainly make sure that all of our good resource links are up there when we post. So thank you very much, Megan, and thank you everybody for joining us. And stay tuned for the next in our series of webinars by the Sustainable Agricultural Education Association. Great, thank you very much. That concludes our webinar.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Stay warm, everybody.